If there is one thing most of us believe, it is this. Happiness is not here yet. It is somewhere ahead, at a certain milestone, at some achievement. One day when things are better than now. Because we believe that, we get used to waiting until we are good enough, successful enough, worthy enough to be happy. Each day becomes a run, not really because we like running, but because we are afraid that if we stop, we will fall behind. But the more we run, the clearer a strange feeling becomes. Tired, empty, and always feeling like something is missing. This story does not say dreams or effort are wrong. It only asks a simpler question. What happens when happiness is always placed in the future? When the present becomes just something to endure? Then what we already have starts to fade. Small moments get ignored. Now what is enough is no longer seen. And maybe, while rushing forward, we quietly ran past our own happiness without even noticing. In this story, the main character does not start from a life of lack. Quite the opposite. The fox lives in a familiar forest, where everything is already in its place. A warm den under the roots of an old tree. A family waiting when the day ends. Familiar friends who hunt together each morning. Nothing too special, but nothing missing either. The fox's life follows a steady rhythm. Out in the morning, back home at night, moving through familiar things without much need to think. More importantly, the fox is not unhappy. It does not feel empty. It is not running from anything. It is not trying to become a different version of itself. Its happiness lives in very small things. The feeling of safety when returning home. The presence of those it knows well. Knowing it belongs here. And that is what makes this story worth thinking about. Because sometimes we do not lose happiness because we lack it, but because we start to believe that what we already have is not enough. Everything begins to change on a very ordinary morning. The fox steps out of its den as the sun rises behind the trees. The light is still low. Long shadows stretch across the ground. Then it sees something strange. A dark shape moving right in front of it. Sometimes faint, sometimes clear, always there whenever it walks. The fox stops, watches, and begins to think. It has never seen anything like this before. The shadow does not stay still. It cannot be caught. But it is hard to look away. In the fox's mind, a thought forms very quickly. Maybe this is not just a shadow. Maybe it is a sign. Something special. If it could catch it, life might be different. Lighter, more complete. This thought does not appear because the fox is unhappy. It appears because the fox starts to believe that another kind of happiness is waiting ahead. From that moment, what feels familiar slowly falls behind. And curiosity, for the first time, begins to lead the way. If you have ever had a moment like this in your life, a thought that made you believe, once I get that, it will be enough. Comment number 1. The fox begins to follow the shadow. At first, just a few short steps. Slow, careful. But each time it moves forward, the shadow slips a little farther ahead. It does not run away. It does not stay still either. So the fox runs. It crosses the familiar meadow. Along paths it has walked hundreds of times. Everything is still there, but no longer truly seen. The shadow leads it farther away, beyond familiar boundaries, across sharp rocks, through a cold stream that soaks its fur. The fox does not look back, not because anyone forces it, but because only one thought remains in its mind. If it stops, it will miss what is waiting ahead. Time begins to move in a different way. Evenings are no longer remembered. Old paths no longer matter. The shadow is still there, always close enough, always promising. When from that moment on, the fox's life no longer revolves around returning home, but around continuing forward. The chase does not stop. It stretches over many days, then many weeks. The fox no longer knows how far it has gone. The paths start to feel unfamiliar. Familiar markers disappear. It no longer returns to its den. It does not hear the calls when evening comes. Meals are skipped. Sleep grows shorter, then fades away. The fur that was once thick and glossy becomes rough. More and more scratches appear. Its breathing grows heavier after every run. Sometimes, it sees other foxes stop, sharing food, lying still under the night sky, not in a hurry, not searching. But it does not stop. There's no time left for small things, no patience left for rest. Because in its mind, the shadow is no longer just something to chase. It has become a reason to keep running, a reason to believe that everything being given up will one day be repaid. Time continues to pass in a quiet way. There are no clear markers, only a growing sense of tiredness. The fox grows thinner each day. Its fur loses its shine. Its eyes are no longer as bright as before. It keeps running, not because it still has strength, but because it no longer knows where to stop. The shadow is still there. Every time it moves, every time it changes direction. That makes the fox believe it has not gone the wrong way, that every effort is being watched, that it only needs a little more. But the body begins to resist. The steps grow slower. The breathing breaks. The pain no longer fades after short rests. There are moments when the fox stops for a long time, not to rest, but because it does not have the strength to go on right away. Then it moves again, because turning back now would mean admitting that everything it left behind might have been for nothing. If you have ever kept going just because you have gone too far to turn back, comment number 1. One afternoon, the fox can no longer run. It stops at the edge of a high cliff. Its legs are shaking. Its breathing is heavy. The sun is slowly sinking toward the horizon. Light stretches out behind it. And then, the shadow appears again. It does not move. It does not avoid. It lies still right in front of it. The fox stands there for a long time. Something feels different. The familiar urge is gone. Only a hollow feeling remains, hard to name. It gathers its last bit of strength, steps forward, then jumps. When its feet touch the ground, there is nothing there, just dry earth, just cold stone. The fox stands still, and for the first time, it turns around. The sun is behind it, light stretches long, and the shadow has always been there. In that moment, everything becomes clear. What it has been chasing all this time was never something separate. It was only itself, stretched out by the light. The fox stands still for a long time. It no longer runs. It no longer chases. The sounds around it seem to fade. Only memories rush back. Evenings when it once returned to the den at sunset. Familiar steps that always led home. The waiting eyes it left behind. Only now does the fox understand. The happiness it was searching for was never ahead. It was never hidden in the shadow. It never needed to be caught. Happiness was there from the beginning, in the repetition that once felt dull, in the familiar things it took for granted. But when the fox realizes this, everything is already too far away. The truth does not bring relief. It brings weight, because understanding something does not mean you can go back. Some realizations only arrive after we have given up too much, and some things only after they are gone. Do we see their true value? If you have ever had a moment like this in your life, comment number 1, the fox turns back toward the old path. But this time, every step feels heavier. When it returns to the familiar den, everything is different. The entrance is covered with dry leaves. There are no signs of life. It calls out. No one answers. The family has left. Friends have moved on to new lives. The forest is still there, but the feeling of belonging is not. The fox sits in front of the empty den. For the first time, it is not searching for anything. It quietly looks at what has been lost. This story does not say we must stop dreaming. It only reminds us of something simpler. Happiness is not a place we reach at the end. It is how we live in each ordinary moment. When we chase an imagined future, we may trade away things in the present that can never be replaced. If this story made you slow down, even a little, leave a comment and share how it made you feel. And if you want to hear more stories like this, subscribe so we can meet again in the next one.